My name is Annalee Davis. This is White Creole Conversations, new ways of thinking about whiteness in a Caribbean context. And today I am with William Abbott, who is here to share some of his opinions about the experience of whiteness in the Caribbean. So thank you, William. I wanted to start, as I start with most of the interviewees, asking how you define yourself in terms of race, class, or nationality.
I define myself as white Creole or mixed.
Okay.
It's never only one thing.
Okay.
I use both interchangeably.
Okay.
Because I also I think that being white Creole necessarily means that you are mixed somewhere along the line.
Okay.
That's how I see it.
Okay.
I was raised upper middle class. I'm currently middle class.
Okay.
And I'm Vincentian.
Okay. So I'm interested that you use the term Creole because a lot of people actually in Barbados don't normally use that term. And I kind of use that term to create space for myself. So is that a term that people use often in St. Vincent or?
No, it's actually a term I first encountered at university.
Okay.
I went to Jamaica to the University of West Indies. And that's the first time I encountered the term white Creole. And I immediately identified with it because it suggests another type of whiteness than the metropolitan, than the, British whiteness.
Right.
And so I identified with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you find yourself thinking about whiteness or race in general? Is it something that occupies your mind, or is it something that interests you at all, or you're not really conscious of?
More so as an adolescent and in my early 20s, when I was trying to find my own identity. Because identity is a very mutating thing, and it's a very difficult thing to pin down. And it was something I never actually came face to face with until actually moving to Barbados at age 16 to do my A-levels.
Okay.
Because in St. Vincent, I never noticed a divide, per se. But going to school here in Barbados, it was an obvious divide on racial lines. Not just white and black, but also Indian as well.
Right.
I found there was 3 strata of race, and it was very clearly defined. And that was new for me. And so from that age, from age 16, well into my early to mid-20s, it was something that I definitely did think about a lot.
And that was a marked difference from the social space you were engaged with in St. Vincent,
Yes,
which was a
very
more
much so.
integrated space?
Much more integrated space.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you say a little bit about how you then, navigated your way through this kind of new terrain at that age? Because if those were quite divided social spaces, how did you manage that?
I compartmentalized my friends. In fact, my mother tells a story of me calling home one night in tears because I didn't understand why my friends didn't want to hang out with each other. Because I thought they were all great. So I compartmentalized them. So I went to Sandy Bank one night with my white friends, and I go to After Dark with my black friends, and that's how it operated.
Right.
And the woman I was living with at the time once saw a photograph of me with my black friends, and she was a white Bajan. And she said, "Oh, you look like the rose among the thorns." And I think that stuck with me up till now. I mean, I'm 39 now, and that still is something that resonates.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe it would be interesting to ask then, maybe that's a good kind of segue into the next question, which is about experience of internal conflict, either in Barbadian or local society as a result of race. How does that, that must have been a difficult thing to negotiate at that age. Would you say that you experienced conflict?
I experienced misunderstanding and confusion. I don't know if I would call it conflict. I don't. That's the only way I can describe it.
Right.
I would not say that I was conflicted in any way. I was disappointed, and it made me reassess. That's when I started actually assessing what it meant to be white in the Caribbean, and it made me start thinking about racism, which is something I hadn't thought about before.
And would those have those ideas that you were having would have become part of conversations with those groups of people, or was
No.
that something that was really much kept to yourself?
Very much kept to myself. I did
Right.
not speak to any of these people about it at all. There was one night at Sandybank, I took one of my black friends to Sandybank, and one of my white friends came up to me and said, "Why did you bring her?" But I never engaged in discussion. I just said, "Because she's my friend."
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
Okay. So one of the questions that I've been asking a lot, and it seems to be a kind of a challenging one to answer, is what makes us feel that we belong? So how do we belong to either Vincentian or Barbadian society? How is it that we feel we connect to a national space or a home environment?
I think a lot of that has to do with other people. I think, unfortunately, a sense of belonging ideally is about where you feel comfortable, but where you feel comfortable is often dependent on other people. And it's where people make you feel comfortable.
Okay.
And it's where you feel like you are recognized as belonging. It's not it almost seems colonial to say, no, it's wherever I feel I belong. That sounds colonial.
Mm-hmm.
It's where I'm accepted. That's where I belong.
Right.
I'm not going to force myself into belonging someplace where I
Mm-hmm.
have pushed myself. But where I'm accepted, that's where I feel like I belong.
So,
And I feel that both for St. Vincent and Barbados, actually.
right. So
Yeah.
you feel a sense of belonging here now. You've been here for a number of years. Can you say anything about belonging through literature? I mean, that, you're engaged with Caribbean literature as a literature teacher, and not only Caribbean literature, but can you say anything about how Caribbean literature could possibly also be a space for belonging? Like, I kind of wonder if we feel we can belong through the arts, maybe, or, because I've noticed a lot of people that are responding to these conversations are themselves writers or creative people. And it seems to me as though a lot of the awkwardness around conversations about whiteness in the Caribbean can be expressed through the arts.
And has been.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think through literature and the arts, we've seen it, but we haven't seen it widespread. We've seen the Jean Rhys's,
right.
That kind of thing. Even your own work, your own early work, definitely spoke to finding a sense of belonging on a racial line. And I think one of the things that the arts can do is to legitimize people's thoughts, people's fears, people's experiences. As white Creole people, in the wider society, we are not encouraged to tell our stories as legitimate. And I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. I actually see that more as it's an organic movement forward. There comes a time when, whether we want to admit it or not, we are the descendants of the oppressor. And there will be a time when we have to be silenced if any kind of equilibrium eventually will be reached at. Somebody has to be dominating the conversation before the conversation can be equal. And it's almost as if maybe now is our time. We're starting to come out from a time when we necessarily needed to be silent so that the other story could be told.
Right.
The story that was buried. Let that story be told. So shut up while it's being told.
Right.
Get off your pedestal. Let someone else get up on this pedestal. And, share.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I don't necessarily think that silence in the arts and in literature is a bad thing.
Right.
But I do think it's changing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm beginning, what I'm noticing through people that are responding from across the region in the diaspora is that there are a lot of white Creoles who are actually addressing this in their work, maybe not overtly, and it just seems like the time is right to begin to have this conversation. And maybe that the conversation about whiteness can shift from what you're describing as a more of a colonial authoritative voice to searching for another way of speaking, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's a way of speaking that has to acknowledge the past
right.
rather than ignoring it.
Right.
And I think a lot of the white Creole people that I know would prefer to ignore the past. And, we can't talk about that. In fact, within my own family, I remember trying to have this conversation once when I was in my early 20s, and it was a big family gathering. And most of my family was like, well, no, we don't want to talk about that. It's unpleasant.
Right.
And you think, well, yeah, of course it was unpleasant. It was more than unpleasant. But it happened.
Right.
And the way our society is structured today, the way you relate to other people in your society is directly as a result of the period of enslavement.
And why do you think, I mean, this I think is a common experience, but why do you think that discomfort exists? I mean, why is it so difficult to articulate it? I mean, maybe for people like yourself and myself who are in literature and we're around language or we're in expressive fields. But, I mean, I remember growing up, there was never a conversation about race in my house. And it was so obvious, but I'm not sure why that was.
I can't speak for generations before mine. But I think there's a lot of, it's a guilt that's not understood. It's feeling guilty but not knowing why you feel guilty because you didn't do anything.
Right, yeah. Okay.
But even so, I mean, my grandmother was an active part of the plantocracy. That's not so long ago.
Right.
My father, as a small child, was an active part of the plantocracy.
Right, yeah.
That's really not that long ago.
Yeah.
So that guilt could very much be a real thing.
Yeah. So can you then talk a little bit about things that make us feel that we don't belong? I mean, is it possibly ideas about guilt? Or, I mean, what is it that makes... I mean, are there moments that you can recall where you felt that you didn't belong in a Caribbean space?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the cultural expression of... A Caribbean cultural expression is a black cultural expression. So that is exclusive in some ways.
So not being able to participate in that.
No, because you can participate, but you just can't be it.
Right.
You can take part, you can tag along, but you're not living it. I look at Carnival, for example, and this is different in St. Vincent than it is in Barbados. In St. Vincent, it's a lot more cohesive. I remember my first crop over, which was actually last year. That's the very first time I've ever been to crop over.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Seeing Blue Boxcat, I think it's called, coming down the road.
Yes.
And thinking to myself, I couldn't see that happening in St. Vincent.
Really?
A Caucasian band coming down the road. I was like, that's just pure white people carrying on stink. And I was like, that wouldn't happen in St. Vincent.
Right.
Like, I played Mass in St. Vincent, and it was very much an integrated thing.
Right.
In fact, I played in a band, my section was called African Solitaire, which was completely ironic and bizarre. But that's what it was. And nobody looked at you like, oh, what are you doing?
You're in the wrong band.
You're in the wrong band. No.
Right.
Because that's just how it is. But to witness this all-white, or not all-white, but almost all-white band.
Right.
Was a very bizarre experience for me.
Yeah. So you just used a word Caucasian. So I find that's a really odd word to use.
I didn't mean it seriously.
Oh,
actually.
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Because I always feel uncomfortable when people refer to me as a Caucasian.
Mean it seriously.
Okay. I mean, one of the questions that people have had a difficult time answering, which I'm going to throw out here, is what's one of the more difficult conversations you've ever had around race? Is there anything that you can recall that was really difficult or awkward about? No. Yeah. Okay.
I don't see race as a difficult thing to talk about.
Okay.
I see it as at times uncomfortable, and I see it as fraught with potholes and danger, depending on who you're speaking with. But I don't see it as difficult.
Okay.
simply because, I'm 39. It's taken me a while to get here.
Right.
And I've never had a difficult conversation about race.
Okay.
I remember when I was at university, I was in drama society, and I wrote and performed a monologue for some university function or other. Basically speaking as the white man. Mm-hmm. And it was very much, at that time, my 19-year-old self being angry and confronting and whatever. So it was like, I never forced anyone to cut cane, I never raped anybody, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But then, as I wrote it, it evolved into something else. And it ended with me saying, all I've ever done is sit and wait for the bloody maid to hurry up and bring me my lunch.
Right.
So it turned into this when I look back on it now, I was actually trying to find it before I came here.
Okay.
And I couldn't find it. Because when I look back on it now, that's how I feel about most white Creole people. Is that they are blind to their own. On the one hand, they say, I don't do this. I'm not racist. I don't see color. But on the other hand, I'm totally benefiting from the fact that black people serve me every day.
Right. So,
and I see white Creole people, many of them, as oblivious to that dichotomy within themselves.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that really brings us to one of the questions, which is about privilege. And if you think about ways in which privilege operates in your life as a white Creole person in the Caribbean, is that something that you're kind of conscious of?
Very much so.
Yeah.
And I have been ever since I was a child. Even though I say St. Vincent is an integrated society, much more so than Barbados, obviously it's still not going to be as integrated as a utopia.
Right.
And I remember one incident in primary school where I hit another child, and his friends turned around to hit back and then saw it was me and said, "Oh, it's you." And there was no retaliation.
So you were protected.
Simply by the color of my skin, and
right.
I assume my social class. I think both
right.
of those things together protected me.
Yeah.
But privilege is something that I'm keenly aware of, and more so here than anywhere else.
So can you talk about that? I mean, do you see ways in which it operates in Barbados in contemporary society now?
Going out with a black friend. My partner is black.
Mm-hmm.
Going out with him. Usually the check is passed to me.
Really?
Yeah. I have gotten fantastic service where people around me who are not white have gotten subpar service. I have witnessed that.
Okay.
And it can only be one reason.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I'm not saying that this is something that happens all the time and that this defines Bajan society, because I don't think it does, actually.
Right.
And I think that these are instances that are anomalous, but they are there all the same. Mm-hmm.
And is there also the reverse of that, where as a white Creole person, that maybe you feel that you're denied access in any way? I mean, is that something?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Conversations often happen. Most of my friends are black.
Mm-hmm.
And they often speak about white people.
Mm-hmm.
And make jokes and whatnot. And it actually doesn't really affect me now, but when I was much younger,
mm-hmm.
it did.
Right.
Because I thought, hello, I'm sitting right here.
Right.
White man right here.
Right.
But then there's this distinction. It's not a distinction that I think a white Creole person would make, but it's a distinction that black Caribbean people sometimes seem to make. I was told by students, you're not white. I've been told by friends, you're not actually white. And so it's almost as if whiteness is not just about skin color. Whiteness is also about experience. It's about culture.
So they're reading you. So whiteness is kind of flexible or variable, and your being read as white or not read is because of a position that you take on something.
Perhaps.
The way you behave.
The way I act, the way I speak, maybe. I don't know.
Right. So, I mean, to me, that's an interesting thing. It kind of shows in some ways how fickle race is,
mm-hmm.
And you're never quite sure how you're being read, on what level you're being read.
I remember in Jamaica, people who did not know me would assume I was American. And I had a nickname, one guy who never had a conversation with me, never met me, but every time he saw me, he called out to G.I. Joe. Every single time. And that one of those things that has always stuck with me. Because it's definitely looking at skin color,
Right.
Whereas I think that race is more than the color of your skin.
Right, yeah, okay. Would you say that you've ever felt humiliation or racism or prejudice because of being a white Creole? Is that something that you feel you've ever experienced, or?
No.
No.
I can't say it.
Yeah, okay.
I have experienced privilege, but not discrimination.
Okay. And so you're socializing across race lines in Barbados. Do you feel that that's a very conscious choice? Because, I mean, in Barbados today, you can still go to a social event where it's 300 white people or 300 black people.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of interested in how that
Well, I'm not a very social person.
Right.
See, I'm unusual in that sense. I would never go to an event by myself.
Right.
And I made friends here through friends mostly.
Right.
And so the first real friend I made here was black.
Right.
And
okay.
It just continued on.
Right. It was
way.
a domino effect
in
there. Okay. Do you have any humorous experiences or anecdotes that relate to being white that you can?
Not
that
really.
You can think of? Okay.
Not humorous, though.
Right. Okay.
No.
All right. No humor in there. And I guess one of the things that I'm interested in talking about is not only looking at the past, but also thinking about how we possibly envision Barbadian or Vincentian or Caribbean society in racial terms. Like, how can we move beyond prejudice? How can we create a more equitable or integrated space?
The quick answer to that is to redistribute wealth immediately.
Right.
And then there you have it.
Right. Okay.
Redistribute wealth and political power. The end.
So this is
I think it's largely an economic divide. I think, particularly in Barbados, I can't speak for any other island except St. Vincent. And in St. Vincent, there's more equity economically. But particularly in Barbados, there's an economic aspect to race, I think. So I think that dismantling that is one way. I don't know. It's not an easy. There's no easy fix.
No, of course not. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm trying to think about ways in which, if we want to change something, how do we actively do that in just really small ways? I mean,
it has to be small ways. It has to be individual. It has to be. You have a New Year's Eve party that is almost exclusively white. And you have several that are almost exclusively black. Why? Why not that party that happens New Year's Eve where it's almost exclusively white? Why not mix it up a little bit?
Right.
Things like that.
Yeah.
Even who do you look at for your friends? Who do you marry? And I think there's a lot of ingrained racism in the society. And I still think that there are many white Creole people who feel a sense of superiority. I have encountered these people. I teach at a private school. And I think that it's an attitude change. And if you're teaching your children that they're better, and that part of being better is their skin color,
right.
And children are being taught that. There are children out there in this country who are being taught that they're better because of their skin color, and because that skin color is tied to something economic as well.
Right.
And until that changes, nothing is going to change.
Have you noticed among the kids that you teach, do issues of race come up at all? Is it something that they discuss, or does it come out in the class? Or?
It's something that they discuss mostly in jest.
Right.
And when I try to introduce it into the classroom on a serious note, it tends to be there are a minority who will engage, and who will engage critically. But there are also very many who would rather sweep it under the rug and not talk about it at all. And will say, why do we have to talk about this? And will say, I don't see color. And which is something I hate when people say, by the way. Because the minute you tell me you don't see color, what you're really saying is I don't see the issues surrounding race that exist and that are very real.
Right. So that's, like this,
and
people
it
say
says
they're
that you don't see your
colorblind.
own privilege.
Right.
One of the things I wanted to make clear is that I don't think the white Creole experience is the same experience that's had by someone who is an American or an English person.
Okay.
Particularly American or even Canadian. Because although colonization operated similarly there, they're a majority. And I think there's a big difference between minority and majority when it comes to race. And there's a lot of talk right now, a lot of controversy right now, particularly in the States, on racial grounds, that I don't think is entirely, is something you can pack wholesale and bring to the Caribbean.
Right.
I think there are different dynamics. And I have a lot of friends who try and equate the Caribbean experience with the American experience, both in terms of whiteness and blackness. And I think it's two completely different experiences.
So you mean like the whole Black Lives Matter and these
which is something I buy
issues?
into, obviously.
Yeah.
And also I do, and the concept of white privilege operates differently, I think, in both spaces. But the concept of the Black Lives Matter, I don't think that operates the same in the Caribbean. I don't think but I do see it as a very American problem.
Right.
The concept of Black Americans almost being targeted by the establishment and being forcibly kept down even now. I think that's a real thing.
Right.
I don't think it operates in the Caribbean.
Yeah. And so when you travel to a place like the US or Canada, because you're part of the racial majority, I mean, how do you feel as a white person there? Do you feel connected or?
Actually slightly intimidated because I don't identify with, particularly white Americans. I don't identify with white Americans in any way at all.
Right.
I find it very difficult to relate to them at some point.
Good. Well, thank you very much for contributing. I appreciate that.